You're watching the Find the Others podcast. In this episode, I'm speaking with Oli Genn-Bash from Brighton in the UK. Oli is a cosmic musician, fellow psychonaut, and functional mushroom expert who does consulting services under the name The Fungi Consultant. He sounds like my kind of guy, and in this conversation, we go really deep into the nexus of music and psychedelics, talking about the relationship between those two powerful worlds. We'll also talk about the sometimes absurd moments in our trips and what's so special about the magical world of mushrooms. So come sit with us and enjoy this podcast episode with Oli Genn-Bash. All right, well, Oli, welcome. Thanks for coming on. This is a really cool way to meet someone for the first time, just to jump straight into nerding out about this topic that interests a lot of us. And I know we have a lot of common interests, so this is the Find the Others podcast, and you've officially been found, brother. So thanks for
Amazing.
coming through.
Thank you for finding me. Thanks for inviting me on. It's great to meet you.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so cool that we can connect as you have the map of the world behind you, that we can connect from so far away, and we have to deal with time zones and working all of that out.
Yeah, totally. It's
Yeah.
great. I mean, it's really fascinating to see the psychedelic world and just the wider space evolving like this, where really, I mean, we organized it. We spoke a few months ago, but then we sort of caught up only last week and arranged it quite quickly. And I think, yeah, if you're able to find that, a little bit of time to just have a chat, it's amazing to have these platforms like Instagram where it is quite accessible, and sometimes it takes over your life a bit. And I've found it with the psychedelic world, it can be a bit overbearing and a bit weird to, I mean, when I first got into psychedelics, social media was still relatively new. So now it's become so, I wouldn't even say massive, it's just permeates so much that it's almost difficult to exist within the psychedelic space and feel like you're relevant without it. So it
Uh,
can feel a bit overwhelming at times, but I think it is amazing to, just find different people and connect and share, and not having to go to a conference or something in a different country or for other people to come over to the UK, but actually to have this quite organic connection
yeah,
just,
exactly.
over the airwaves.
Yeah, and organic is a key word. That's something that our mutual friend Dennis is super into. Is all about the kind of like guerrilla tactics of just people bootstrapping and doing it themselves. Whether that's growing mushrooms or making some kind of independent media and making video content. And we were able to do this so on the fly because it's just two guys basically agreeing to hop on a video call. There's no like, let me run it by the production team and like all this red tape. It was just like, all right, let's do it.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
yeah, man. So I would love to, ask you some questions and just have kind of like a free range conversation. But I do have some stuff that I, wanted to kind of get to. So starting off, I just want to, bring up our shared interests because you and I both have a foot in both worlds, and those two worlds being the psychedelic world and the music world. So definitely want to talk to you about that. You play saxophone in your band Codex Serafini. Did I say that
Yeah,
correctly?
that's right.
Nice. So Ollie the Sax-Man, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
How long you been doing that?
So I've been playing saxophone since I was 9 years old. So that's 26 years now.
Wow.
And I've been playing in Codex Serafini, trying to figure it out because I started playing with them remotely during COVID. So it was probably 2020, I guess. Yeah. So for the past 4 years, and recorded with them remotely, and then had didn't actually kind of meet them in person until maybe a few months after actually recording some music. So it was quite an interesting journey, and we certainly from a musical perspective hit it off really quickly. It all flowed just super, it's quite magical, I think, finding people that are really on a similar wavelength to you music wise, but also bringing different interests, different music tastes, quite varied music tastes. And we've somehow brought this sound together where it's a different mix of all our favorite types of music.
Yeah. Do you have because when it comes to describing music, that's one of the trickiest things, that it can be really hard to describe it sometimes. But I found that when you're talking to just an average person versus a music nerd, you might describe it differently. So how would you describe it firstly to someone like me who's another musician, where you can just rattle off some eclectic influences and I might know what you're talking about?
Yeah, cool. So I often say to people, if you have ever listened to some of the more spacier side of the progressive rock scene from the 60s and 70s, so bands like Hawkwind that go off into kind of long jams, there is some saxophone influence there as well. Bands like Gong, again, the sort of epic odysseys that go in quite hard with riffs and guitar solos and saxophone solos. So we capture a lot of that. But then we really have a lot of influence, I guess, from Black Sabbath. It's very riff driven, it's very doomy. It's there's a lot of fuzz and overdrive on the bass. It's very loud. I'm using a lot of delay on my saxophone, so it's got high pitch vocals. It's got drums that are just absolutely driving it.
Yes.
So, but it's a bit punky. There's a little bit of noise influence as well. We're quite a fan of the noise rock scene, and in general quite heavy music. So we will often play festivals where there's a lot of metal bands playing. So for example, we played at Arctangent Festival this summer, where that was very eclectic. The headliners were Meshuggah, Electric Wizard, but then there was Mogwai, Explosions in the Sky, Spiritualized. I don't know if you know Spiritualized. Yeah. Very dreamy, psychedelic. So this real mix, and for us it was a perfect festival, because just as an attendee, it was incredible the amount of just you could go from one tent and see, there's some electronic type stuff going on, and then the other tent is just absolutely crushing, devastating riffs, and then something else that's a bit weird and psychedelic going on.
Yeah, and you guys, you hit all of that within the span of one song. I listened to your EP that you sent me on Bandcamp, and I could hear a lot of the influences that you just listed off, because the drummer is extremely good, by the way.
Yeah.
Just totally ripping and very driving behind the music. And then the guitar has moments where it's just so heavy, you can tell that there's a metal influence, but they're doing such trippy stuff. And I also caught on to this wall of sound element, which I think is actually very psychedelic. There's this band, Battles. You familiar with them?
Yeah, I love Battles.
I couldn't find the quote. I tried to find it again before we had this talk, but I remember hearing him say, the mystic truth is revealed in a wall of sound. And I thought that was so true, because there's something visceral and, something about the psychedelic experience can sometimes be very primal. It's one of the features of the experience. And I feel like music can kind of activate that primal psychedelic sense. It's not just plain gorilla beating his chest primal, but something primordial and ancient feels awakened. And that's what I felt like. I wrote on my notes, listening to your music, I felt like something was being summoned, you guys were conjuring something. So how do you perceive that?
We describe ourselves as ritualistic. We
There you
often
go.
say, we talk about, we ask people, are you coming for the ritual? It is this, we have a very theatrical performance, but we don't do it in a, I like to think we don't, it's not in a gimmicky way. It's very much rooted in that deep, primal, but I guess it's somatic. It's that energetic release where, for me, the reason why I love heavy music and psychedelics is because you're presented with a choice. You can either run away and go, I don't like that, that's too much, or you physically, you see people that are, when I see people tripping at festivals like heavy music, you can see their body is open. They've opened themselves up and given themselves over. And in that sense, it's very therapeutic and cathartic. And you're allowing that sound to act as a conduit for you to just expand into. And you have that dissolution of the ego, I think, in those moments. Because it is... my partner, she's so lovely and sweet, and she, like, her favorite music is big band New Orleans jazz, right? She just absolutely loves it. And she's genuinely like, I don't understand why you listen to such like scary, devastating music. And I understand it's like from people's perspective, and it's funny, we've played at psychedelic festivals where it is people from the 60s, 70s generation, and there's a lot of music which is of a very high quality. It's not necessarily that divergent. It's within a nice, I would say, it's quite safe in terms of people are expecting a certain style of psychedelic music.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we're coming in with heavy riffs and wall of sound type stuff, we've had some people at the more psychedelic leaning festivals give us feedback and just say that's too heavy for me. I didn't really get it, So sometimes I feel like we have this amazing, unique selling point in that we don't sound like anyone else. But because we don't sound like anyone else, it can be a bit difficult for people to place us, and it can make people feel a bit uneasy, which I really like. I'm just like, let's go for it. If it's making you feel a bit uneasy, let's work with that. Maybe there's some release that can happen in that moment.
Yeah. Like embracing the discomfort. And, one of the things that I think when I think of heavy metal or, or metal adjacent music, stuff with like a heavy groove, there's something simply ego dissolving about like headbanging to the groove. When I feel possessed by some heavy music to like, I feel like I'm like a servant or like a slave to the music, where it's like you're letting this thing subsume you and you're just like, and it feels so
slave
good.
To the riff.
Yes. And it feels so good. It's so cathartic. And that's why a lot of the metalheads I know are like the sweetest people, because they've had this catharsis, and it's like, their music's scary, but that's actually an outlet for them to like do. It's like a big like shadow work kind of thing.
Absolutely. Shout out to a charity in the UK called Heavy Metal Therapy that, they really do get this whole thing of the cathartic nature of headbanging, being in a mosh pit. It is, you just see it, and it's like a unifying experience, especially, the whole riff face thing, the like, when the riff comes back slower, the riff stank, and you're like, and you just look at people and you're like, and everyone's feeling it, and and for me, it's like, man, if you want to talk about dissolution of ego, unifying consciousness, where it's everyone, that the other person knows that you are in that same, and you're feeling that same guttural sense that's just got you. I do think you're all in it in that same level. It's less, less unpredictable than the psychedelic experience.
That's true.
I sort of like there's not much, even though a mosh pit is objectively scary. There's and I don't go into mosh pits anymore because I'm 35 years old and have various physical health problems. But even when I'm like standing on the edge of a pit, there is a bit of trepidation to kind of protect myself or whatever. But there's not that same. It's like I know what's going to happen. Nothing's going to be too crazy or potentially go wrong. You've generally got that safety as well. Like if someone falls down, people are pretty quick to pick them up.
Yeah.
So there's something about those experiences which I think is almost like psychedelics can learn a lot from the metal scene in how to create experiences which are intensity and power, but safety and connectivity and a collective understanding of it. And it doesn't necessarily have to even be that finely curated. With the psychedelic stuff, particularly if we're talking in the more medicalized or therapeutic sense. I guess that's where I'm, in the UK, we don't have the benefit of having any real access. So if you're going to a retreat in another country or you're having a psychotherapeutic experience, it has to be carefully, finely tuned. Whereas, I went to see Meshuggah at the Royal Albert Hall a few years ago, and I took some acid, and I, went in. I was in the standing area where there was a big pit happening. It was pretty difficult to escape it. But there wasn't much fine-tuning or preparation. It was just, I'm going to go in and give myself over to the experience. I'm going to just be in this unified experience. And it was the most fun I've ever had at a gig, where everyone was just bouncing around, people are grooving. It was just absolutely wild. And you really felt this sense of togetherness and collectiveness.
Yeah.
And that, and I guess, okay, some people in those situations have for sure had bad experiences. People don't talk about the overdoses at Woodstock, or fucking hell, what was that festival in the 70s that everything went really bad, where they had like the Hells Angels providing security?
Yeah. I think, that was like a Rolling Stones concert in Monterey or something like that.
That's right, yeah. So, shit does go wrong at these festivals and in these situations. But I also think now, sometimes I feel a little bit just more well-armed maybe than previous generations. So it's like I don't think we need to necessarily have more control and restrictions, because a lot of that fear comes from the overindulgence of the 60s and 70s. But from my perspective as being a millennial and growing up with Erowid, for me, most people I know tend to take drugs safely. I don't really know many drug casualties. Most people I know are pretty switched on, and you can, I think, comfortably kind of engage with your own drug taking in these more recreational settings and still have quite a safe, enjoyable time.
Yeah. No, there's so many factors at play too, because you want to know your dosage if you're going to be in public. Like, I wouldn't go beyond a certain amount if I knew I was going to be at a concert. If I'm going to go see, I went to a festival and it was all day, so acid was perfect for that because it was going to last me the whole day. And I just took one hit, I'm not going to take 4 hits. Maybe someone who's less sensitive to that could probably pull it off. But for me, I know myself, I know my dosage. So I was able to make that informed decision. And like, when it comes to something like, going to a heavy metal show, I was just listening to something last night from 2 other psychedelic creators from Australia. It was Trip Whip and your mate Tom. And your mate Tom was talking about how before his initial psychedelic experiences, he was a big metalhead. But he went into the psychedelic experience uninformed, And so he just threw on some super brutal metal music and he wasn't prepared for it and it scared the shit out of him.
Sure.
So, but I feel like the difference between that and like what you're saying is that you are coming in prepared, you know? Whereas if someone has no idea what to expect at all, then that's where, you know, that can get a little scarier. People like you who are interested in expanding consciousness are most likely curious about other modes of altering consciousness, especially if it results in a meditative tranquility. I've been experimenting with these gummies for my friends in Minnesota Nice Botanicals, a company made by people like us dedicated to using nature's magic alkaloids to make life a little bit better. They're well known for their Amanita muscaria, the iconic Mario mushroom whose image is synonymous with mushrooms. When I tried a microdose, I felt more zen. I'm already kind of a relaxed and mellow guy, and this kind of locked me even deeper into that state where it felt like there was no chance of me getting stressed out by anything. They also have powerful plants like Kana, known for its calming mood lift, and my personal favorite, Blue Lotus, which was used as a sacrament in ancient Egypt. I always say that Blue Lotus puts me in a state where poetry will pour out of me, which makes it great for creativity in my music and other creative pursuits. It's a subtle, calming, and heart-opening effect that pairs well with so many other things. And what these all have in common is that feeling of subtle euphoria, lightness of being, and generally feeling more chilled out, without necessarily needing to visit hyperspace. You could use these as a way to unwind at the end of the day, relax you into a more creative headspace, or enhance your meditation, making it a good alternative to the devil's lettuce. They have way more than that on their website too, and I'm looking forward to trying some. I want you to know that I take very seriously vetting anything I would recommend to you guys. Minnesota Nice is run by good people. They're fellow psychonauts who get it and are on a purpose-driven mission to share nature's wonders with the world. There are a lot of sketchy products out there, and it can be hard to know where to look if you're interested in trying any of these things. I have complete trust in their integrity and that they're running this operation ethically and safely. I'm sharing this with you because I've been using the gummies myself for months. I like them, and I genuinely think that those of you who watch my channel would like them too. So if you're interested in adding these plant allies to your toolkit, go to the link in the description and use code SAUCE to get a 10% discount. When you do, you'll help support this channel, support my friends, and help yourself. 3 birds, 1 stoner.
Yeah, it's funny because when I first got into psychedelics, I was similar to your friend in the sense that I didn't even try listening to heavy music. I was just pretty much taken over by a lot of music from the 60s and 70s. A lot of just, I mean, I was getting really into interesting different types of experimental music and a lot of really cool psychedelic stuff, interesting electronic stuff. I don't know what shifted. I don't know if there's something to do with brain development and settling into myself more now. I'm in my 30s. And as well, I think just having more experience and doing lower doses. I think in my 30s it was very, you know, when you're doing these things for the first time, you really want to see what they're about. So we're having quite powerful experiences, particularly with things like acid. And now for me, where I can take, I would say, I mean, it's not accurate dosing, splitting up tabs, but I would take a quarter of a tab before playing a show. And if, you know, at that Meshuggah gig, I took half a tab, which was pretty strong experience, but it was, you know, it was pretty manageable. Mm-hmm. And on that kind of quarter of a tab thing, for me, it comes like an interesting, similar to MDMA on a kind of hyper-social sense, but more locked in, more finely tuned in. And it almost like it fills me with more confidence about the stuff that I really love and enjoy. It allows more conviction, now that I'm a bit older. And I think there is a lot of that going on as well, where I'm quite, I play in a heavy band, I listen to a lot of heavy music, I am socially involved in the heavy music scene in Brighton. So there has been an identity shift, which then I guess, it does have that effect on the neurophysiological experience. So being exposed more, I've seen more heavy music in the past 4 years of my life than I've done in the previous, I'm trying to think, would have been like 15 years of going to gigs.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's just crazy the amount of just brutal noise that I've been exposed to.
Yeah.
So there's something where it's, I don't know, maybe I've like indoctrinated my brain where, as a musician, I would like to listen to more genres of music, but it tends to kind of span between sort of heavy music, bit of electronica, bit of psych, and then like jazz, Afrobeat, Ethio jazz. But it's not necessarily massively wide reaching. I'm very sure of what I like, and particularly within the kind of heavy music world, there are a lot of different genres that span it. So I feel quite blessed to be in this band and just have a lot of new bands exposed to me. And I think because of that social aspect that comes with it, I just really find, that benefit of it. It's easier for me to let go, I think. It's easier for me to give into an experience with the heavier stuff, and with the slightly lighter music, there is some resistance, I think.
Yeah. It makes sense that the heavier stuff just kind of like pierces straight through the skin, hits you in the gut right away. And you could say that about other types of music, but I can see how the heavier stuff would just like break through immediately. Something I wanted to get your take on is that, the term psychedelic music is so vague and wide reaching, and there's so many different kinds, because there's stuff like what y'all do, and then there's, psytrance, and then there's 60s flower power psych, and then everything in between. So what do you think makes music psychedelic? Because it's hard to define, but when you hear it, you know it.
Yeah, I mean, that is a fascinating question, particularly at the moment where there is a lot of curation happening within the scientific fields, within the crossover fields between academic researchers and musicians that are producing music which has more of an intention behind it. I wonder if there's something happening at the moment where, because there's some degree of top-down influence from researchers and the organizations that have mainstreamed psychedelia, I wonder if there might be people that are being worked with and being promoted that are essentially being shown to the world as, this is what psychedelic means, because it's doing these different things that we are researching, and we're understanding the brain in this way, and we're understanding, the whatever different functions in a trip that this type of music can do. I do think it's problematic to not think about things in terms of a historical musical lineage. I think sometimes it can be too open a question, or rather the answer is often too open. The answer can just be, it's mind manifesting music, and it opens it up to everyone, and anyone can be making psychedelic music. And sometimes it might be a bit tokenistic, where it's got, it sounds like music from South America. Now, what I'm finding is the emergence of medicine music, devotional music, and there are there's a crossover between genres of electronic music, which might be referred to as, so there's a genre called Andes step, which is a certain type of electronic music from the Andes. It has its roots in traditional Andean music and also electronica, but then because there is this, I would say, fetishization of the, particularly South America, I find it in the UK that there is, when it comes to psychedelics, a lot of deference to South America. That kind of music, which I enjoy quite a lot, is now being brought into this space of devotional music, medicine music. And then I wonder, is that the same as psychedelic music? Because for me, there's not necessarily a clear lineage, but there are certain bands from, I would say, we talk about the 60s. I would say it's more early 70s onwards where you're really getting into psychedelia. The hippie stuff actually started happening more in the 70s. But, yeah, I mean, I'm sort of rambling on a bit. It's a bit difficult to answer, I guess. Certainly, I mean, the easy answer is music that sounds good when you're on drugs.
Right. Which could arguably be said is all music. So does that make everything psychedelic music?
It could do. I think that's possibly a bit of a get out. I don't think it's a question that's really been explored in enough detail before researchers are jumping in and collaborating with electronic artists to curate music for psychedelic experiences. I find it weird that there are curated playlists for magic mushrooms, because to me, listening to music on magic mushrooms is often disastrous. It doesn't really work. Yeah, that's a personal thing for me. I've tried loads of times, and if I'm on quite a strong dose, it's oftentimes just to shut up and listen and sit with them. And for me, the music gets in the way of the downloads.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, there's a franchise festival in the UK called Psychfest, and psych seems to be quite a broad genre. It seems to kind of mean things that hipsters like to listen to when they're tripping, which is totally cool. But for me, there's certain bands which are, if we're looking at the 60s and 70s era, there's certain bands which have been connected to that counterculture in a very intimate way, in a way of actually engaging with these societal issues where drugs were becoming a focal point and really influencing the music. And I think, a lot of the progressive music stuff that's pertaining to lyrics about magic and wizards and the imaginary, the mystical. But yeah, it's really difficult.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think
Sorry, that probably wasn't a very good answer.
No, it's okay, because I don't think there is a clear answer to be said. I was just more getting at like your individual perspective on the things that you've encountered and like what makes that feel psychedelic to you. But there's a lot of interesting stuff that you brought up along the way, like the idea of, curated psychedelic music and the South American stuff, like when I think of stuff that's getting pushed out there, not that to say that it's bad, but, like that guy, John Hopkins. He has albums that are like modeled after the come up and the peak, and like tracks are supposed to go in certain way, which I think he's genuinely doing that from an artistic place. Like he's not some kind of industry plant or anything like that, but I think that that's like kind of a safe thing that could get pushed out. And this South American phenomenon of like medicine music, I'm interested in it, but I'm kind of looking at it from a distance, right? Like most of the times that I hear that is like, on like a micropreneur video where he's using it in kind of like a funny, ironic way. Like he's wearing the Speedo and then he's got like the ayahuasca, like the vocal music in the background. So I'm really just an observer from a distance on that. So I don't really see it as prominently, but it's interesting to hear you point that out. And there's also, we could go in a million different directions here. I just want to like kind of say a few things that I've thought of, is that like there's also an interesting connection to progressive music, where a lot of the early prog from the 70s emerged from psychedelic bands that just naturally evolved to do progressive. So I think what's cool about what our bands do is like it's kind of bringing it back again full circle and taking the progressive music and making it, re-dipping it back into the psychedelic sauce. And I just think that's really
remind
cool.
me of the name of your band again.
Sunrise and Ammunition.
Cool.
Yeah. So
what are your main influences?
Bands like when we started off, we were a cover band essentially of The Fall of Troy.
Okay.
Who played Arctangent, and they're kind of adjacent to your friends in Delta Sleep. That kind of like math rocky, which we didn't really call it that until more recently, but yeah, it's kind of unconventional time signatures and that kind of thing. But what makes me think of psychedelic music is I would agree with you that there's no simple answer to it, but one of the things that comes to my mind is a feeling of a trance. You think of repetition, something, like krautrock. Something repetitive for you to lock into and kind of get a pattern going in your head. And there's something about like that kind of thing that enters you into a trance. So I think that's one element. And then I don't know what it is about, fuzz guitars, or I wonder how much of this is like cultural versus just purely sensory, because we think of like these music that was getting psychedelic, they're using Eastern scales, playing things that sound like a sitar. Is that only because it sounds foreign and exotic to us that it makes it kind of psychedelic, or is there something really deeper going on? For example, with the sitar, there's something about overtones also, and the harmonic series of overtones that is very psychedelic. And you hear that with things like a sitar, where there's like extra strings that are resonating that gives you that mystical sound, and even things like throat singing, which I don't think are really psychedelically influenced, but there's something about hearing that shift of the overtone frequencies.
Yeah, well, the overtoning does have an influence on your brainwave state. So if you're listening to overtoning, it's doing something in terms of shifting your brain into like alpha theta brainwaves. So there is interesting things happening with tones and microtones and overtones, where your brain naturally wants to go into these states because it's nice and calming. It puts you into parasympathetic nervous system, mystical experience, this unitive. And maybe there is something cultural going on where it's like, oh, that's foreign. But I mean, I think the people who are playing the ragas are deeply, I mean, I've not seen many raga sitar players live. I had the benefit of seeing Anushka Shankar last year, and you just see her just in it. It is like a shamanic thing that's happening, where I think there is this deep awareness of where you're going from these tones, what it's doing, the space in between the notes, where the ragas start off slowly and it just builds up and then just gets into this really complex, really fast. I think it's changing your brainwave states.
Nice. Yeah, that's fascinating. I think we might actually be getting to the bottom of this a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, what is it like about the brainwave state and kind of activating that different state of consciousness? It's consciousness altering, but how do you how would you describe that? And this is more rhetorical, you don't really have to answer, but like how would you describe the mechanism of making that happen? It's like, yeah, we can point it out after the fact that yeah, this seems to be altering our brain and our state of consciousness, but what is in it that's making that happen? And you could point to the repetition, the drones, the overtones, it could just be that the state of consciousness is reflected in the music in some way. Like you can almost hear the intention behind it, the same way that, oh, you can tell this meal was prepared with love. And maybe in music you can sense something like that, where you can sense there's this kind of higher intention behind it, or even a higher state of consciousness. Whereas like a song about, wanting to get with the girl in the club might not be the most esoterically inspired number. So I don't know. You
Yeah,
got
I
any
mean
thoughts?
the whole thing about chanting Om, it's not, we're like Om Shanti Shanti, and it's all very peaceful. But actually, in the Sanskrit, the Om is the resonance of the universe.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're chanting Om, you're actually engaging with the universe self. So if it is, if we kind of take the concept of the universe experiencing itself subjectively, it's almost like universe screensaver mode. You're just going into this like, we are universe, we are resonance, everything is Om, and you feel it in certain parts of your body. The tones are resonating with certain chakral points. So
Yeah.
I do think there is something quite fascinating about certain types of music, particularly these microtonal or tonal overtoning ways of having a quite a direct connection. I think that's what I find interesting about Indian classical music, chanting mantras, that there is some sense of like an immediate resonance with a greater vibration. And I guess that's kind of what maybe psychedelic is for me. It's music which is taking me out of this space and engaging with that greater energy field, that ecstatic moment of breaking out of the confines of just this everyday, predictable consensus reality. We have an experience which is revelatory and creates a shift, and it is, that somatic, energetic experience. Sometimes it might be full-bodied, sometimes we might feel it. Often I find with the heavy music, it's a very visceral kind of in the solar plexus, and you feel it, and then that energy release coming from there. Yeah, I think
That's
it's
beautiful. Yeah, and that it's such a release to experience that feeling. Like you just feel so refreshed after, feeling like you transcended, even for just a moment, whether that's a concert or you're listening to music on psychedelics. I think that another thing that comes into play in this equation is the idea of synesthesia, where, some things, psychedelic music, feels like it's catered to play with almost tickle your sensory faculties, where I feel like there's a lot of like textural stuff going on. And maybe that's what it comes down to with like fuzz guitars and things like that. It's a texture that almost becomes like the furry carpet wall that you can pet, when you're in this heightened sensitive state. It's like and then on top of that, just besides hearing the textures, when you're in that mode of synesthesia, it translates into a full experience of it's now turning into a visual, it's like you can taste the music, and sometimes it feels like some psychedelic music is designed to play with you in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a band called the Flowers of Hell
Cool
where
name.
the lead guy Greg, he's famously, I think his name's Greg, he's famously known for creating music. He has naturally occurring synesthesia. And so his music is based around this, conception of sound. And I think, yeah, there's probably a lot of musicians, probably a lot of psychedelic musicians, which have some, they probably have some degree of synesthesia where they're thinking in these ways which aren't necessarily rooted in the usual ways of perceiving things, and that it creates for more powerful experiences.
Absolutely. It's really fascinating. I'm very interested in people that have synesthesia. I don't think I have it myself. I would say I have mild synesthesia that like I can kind of vaguely be like, this kind of feels orange to me, but it's not something so clear that, the
Yeah,
way
yeah.
that people with actual synesthesia describe it. But I will say I feel like psychedelics and cannabis kind of activated that for me, where it allowed me to start thinking in those terms. And in that state of consciousness, I feel like it is literally synesthesia, where it's like some people just have it turned on all the time, and then for others it can be activated through things like psychedelics. And I'm just very fascinated by that area because the visuals I've gotten with eyes closed listening to music, they have this emotional weight to them where it's like this isn't just some cool pattern I'm looking at. This feels like it's tied to my emotional state, and it feels like it's telling me something. And I don't know. I'm just
I
really
like
interested
that.
in that. Yeah.
I've had that with, not necessarily with synesthesia, but I've had a similar experience with closed eye visuals and magic mushrooms, and very much this communicating, but just through visual, just through image, just this. Yeah, I mean, it's difficult, to talk about it in words, but it is
Yeah, of
that
course.
weird, like, it's that revelatory, just like, fuck, you know?
Yeah, it's such a
Yeah.
good feeling. Something I want to also ask you about, you mentioned like taking a quarter of a tab before a show, and in my eyes that means that there's going to be some improvising going on, and I've had some really cool experiences myself while like jamming on psychedelics, and I think that some really cool stuff can happen, and you enter this flow state which is revelatory in its own way. So yeah, I would like to hear your experiences on like improvising and jamming while on psychedelics.
Yeah, it's funny. I haven't necessarily jammed so
Gotcha.
much in recent years
Gotcha.
on
Yeah.
psychedelics. And it's almost, yeah, maybe the opposite when I'm using LSD in particular before a show. There's a lot of structure. So there's almost that confidence to, yeah, I can take a bit of acid because I know what's going on, and then I just lock in, and then pretty much stick to the same. I've kind of written a lot of the saxophone lines, so there's not necessarily a huge amount that's improvised.
I gotcha.
Yeah, I mean, I've done like a little bit of microdosing before a jam, which to me it is just, yeah, as you said, locking into that flow state, and it allows for some anticipation, or it increases that anticipatory nature of jamming. So when Miles Davis talks about that space in between the notes, when I found with my thoughts, when I'm on my own on acid, that space in between the thoughts is a similar space to being in between the notes. It's actually that
Interesting.
ability to observe and be quite calm and get a nice overview and realize where you're having this unifying experience with the other people, where you're jamming, you're having to become this one organism.
Yeah.
So for me, yeah, something like LSD in particular, there's almost like a time travel aspect where I'm seeing in the future, I'm hearing the notes before they're playing, and then it feels very much like we've practiced these things 100 times. It just it flows. It feels like it doesn't necessarily come from me. It's just there to be plucked out of the universe. And using psychedelics allows that pluck. It's like you've hacked the mainframe, and you're like, oh, brilliant! There's that bit there, that bit there. I'll grab that. And but yeah, with shows, it's often it's very useful for the intensity of my playing and just the joy. And yeah, I will get more experimental with what's going on and just like go a bit more wild with delay and effects, and particularly the performance, the physical aspect of the performance. I find something like LSD really useful. It gives a lot of energy and a lot of confidence in the actual physical nature of playing, not feeling like you're going to get something wrong, or I'm moving my hands quite quickly and hitting wrong notes and things like that, but it gives me more confidence just to kind of lock into my body and flow physically as well as mentally.
Yeah. You brought up an interesting point that made me think about how maybe there's a 50-50 thing going on when you're playing in a group, is that 50% of it is the playing and the output, but the other 50 that needs to be just equally as prominent is the receiving end, that you are actively listening to the music and you're taking in what is happening around you. And that's what allows you to like hit that telepathic connection, which is a magical feeling, by the way, for any musician who's experienced that. It's like the best, where you feel like
someone said to me at a house party years ago, I was sort of saying the same thing, and he goes, yeah, I mean, how many times do you do something and just know it's going to go right? And I was like, fuck.
Yeah.
It is that thing, it's like when you have played music for a good amount of time and you find musicians that are on the same wavelength, it's like there is that sense of just like, yeah, we're just going to get this. And it is not like, I don't have that same experience with anything else.
Yeah.
And it's that just like, wow, fucking hell, just like got it. We've done this, I don't know. Found a gem. I always talk about it as gems. When we get songs, I'm just like, oh, we found some treasure.
Yeah. It's such a good feeling, man. And it reminds me of, I think it might have been Terrence McKenna or Alan Watts who described telepathy as not being able to read each other's mind, but kind of coming to the same thought at the same time. And that's what the connection feels like on music. Yeah, it feels like we're not like, let me guess what they're gonna do. It's like, no, you both just get there at the same exact time.
Yeah, no, I'm still to this day, like, particularly with our bassist and drummer who are just like, they got it down, and sometimes I'm like, how have you just, and it would be like the first time that they've tried a jam and then they're just going for it, and it really is astounding.
Yeah. And some people have these experiences without music where you're tripping in a group with somebody, and then you have these like telepathic moments where you feel like you can hear someone's thoughts, or maybe there's some kind of intuitive faculty that we have where we're a lot smarter than we think in the way that we can predict how another brain is going to feel. But something about this state of mind tunes you into that. It taps you into that more intuitive state. Maybe it's because all we needed to do was quiet down that thinking, narrativizing voice up there to be able to tune into this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. I've had some really interesting experiences with friends where, especially friends whose first language isn't English, and then under the influence of psychedelics, that faculty for English becomes a bit more limited, but then you have these moments of kind of, if you know, you know, and that whole thing of coming to the same conclusion at the same time. I do think it is this tapping into field of experience and helping us to understand what consciousness is and realize where, yes, we might be producing it, but it's kind of quite limited. It's like we're producing consciousness to the extent that we are a node, an active node, so we can receive what's going on, and then we filter it all out. And then under the influence of psychedelics, that filter becomes less restricted. And so then when you're in the same state, actually you're vibing on a similar level. So then the nature of information flooding in is kind of relatively the same. Whereas if someone's on a psychedelic and someone's not, that person who's not is going to have more of a restricted filter. So actually the field of information that's available is more restricted.
Yeah.
Whereas it's like we're both, if we're on psychedelics, it's like, oh, we're both taking a dip into this big lake together. Whereas the person who's not on psychedelics might just be splashing their feet in a puddle.
Right.
And no one else can get in that puddle because the puddle is too small for two people. Whereas like, hey, come on, we've got this whole lake of experience, and you know, this stuff, the restricted bit is kind of gone away. And for me, I have a lot of experiences outside of psychedelic stuff that really brings it home, the idea of one consciousness. Too many coincidences, too many experiences of thinking about someone and that person calls or whatever it is. And loads of people have had these kinds of experiences. And for me, it's maybe weird that we don't have more telepathy going on, where we don't have these experiences of being in altered states and arriving at the same conclusion.
Yeah. No, and that's why it feels so good when we do get to experience that, because it's not the norm. You know, it feels fantastic. But yeah, maybe we could benefit from learning to tap into that more. But it's all a big mystery for now. But that's part of the reason that I'm so excited to like talk about it and dig into it, because it's like it's a big mystery, and that's a big part of my philosophy and in the videos that I make and the conversations that I have and just life in general, is this sense of cultivating awe and wonder at the marvels of our universe, because there's like a spiritual and even physical, I believe, benefit to experiencing awe and wonder. So yeah, we might be even just healing ourselves right now by just being like, whoa, man, like what's going on?
I really, it's such a good point, man. Like the ideas of enlightenment and feeling like you need to have reached a certain point and some signifier that you are healed and cleansed. My perspective is always like, this is doing the enlightenment right now, the engaging in it, the dialogue. It's doing what the mystics did. You know, the mystics didn't sit around in their yoga studio being like, I am all enlightened and I am one. It's like, no, they were writing about it, they were sitting around, they were discussing, they were having experiences and figuring them out, talking about them, not necessarily just taking everything at face value, having different multiple interpretations of one word in different contexts to mean different things. And yeah, I think it is all an emerging process, and that's what I find, you know, with these kinds of connections, being able to talk in different countries, it is that, you know, just the very act of you saying, hey, I'm going to start a podcast and and chat to people, and you reaching out to me and me being up for it and being like, yeah, let's go. Just that moment is enlightenment playing out, because it's that connection, whether it is, the universe experiencing itself, but it is that moment of recognition where it's like, yeah, we should chat, and just for the sake of our souls, to get a conversation flowing. And I think the more that kind of thing is happening, and I think it is, more people are really engaged with not necessarily trying. I mean, there's a lot of people engaged in figuring it out from a scientific perspective and doing all the research and getting all the funding, and I understand that, and that's not necessarily my world, but the kind of philosophical, or whatever it is, that the exploratory zest that psychedelics gives us, this desire to be like, man, I got to talk to someone about this. I can't just, it's so exciting. We try so hard to F the ineffable. Yeah. And I think we just got to keep doing it, because that's, we're never going to get to, if we got to the end and figured everything out, it would be utterly boring. So it's all the process, it's the journey of finding out what other people think about it and sharing, and I think resonating, having those, I mean, man, this is the first conversation I've had, honestly, thank you so much. It's the first conversation I've had with someone on a podcast where we're talking about music and psychedelics in a way that isn't, I mean, I haven't really spoken to anyone much about psychedelics and music, but when it does come up, it's often within these curated artistic ways of viewing things in the, what does this mean for XYZ, rather than just the enjoyment, the release that comes out of engaging in music in a somatic sense.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad to hear that, man. Yeah, that's something that's super important to me is the subjective experience and the artistic creativity that comes out of that. I think, I'm a really big believer in art having a big role in saving our souls, like as a young psychonaut, like everyone else, I devoured Terence McKenna recordings. And one of my favorite talks of his is his message for artists. His famous quote from that is that the task of the artist is to save the soul of mankind. If the artist can't find the way cannot be found. And I mean, what's a more profound mission than that, and to do it without the self-seriousness, which I think you can get there by recognizing, that it's not all us. It's not the ego that's doing a lot of this stuff. Actually, all the best art and creativity seems to be coming from somewhere else. And by subsuming the ego and stepping out of the way is when the most profound and powerful moving stuff emerges. So you can't take credit for that, so it's like the ego shouldn't even be like, yeah, I'm this musician.
It's crazy. I feel really I still cannot shake the school kid who was playing in high school woodwind bands, and saxophone was just so geeky. And then I have people going, my girlfriend is like, oh, you're so cool, you play in a band. Nah, this is just, it's like, I don't know why I play saxophone. I started playing it when I was 9 years old. My parents didn't say you should play saxophone. There was some spirit that got inside me that was like, you need to play saxophone. I'm like, okay, I don't know why I've done this. I do this thing, I've always done it, and I love it. I couldn't necessarily break it down for you. It's just like, I have to play saxophone. This shell of a thing has to play saxophone. So then when people are like, even my bandmates, when they compliment me, I'm still just like, oh yeah, but like, you guys are all amazing, and it's a real privilege to be a part of this project. It's, I engage a lot with kind of gratitude practice, and I'm always just eternally grateful that I was picked by whatever force to play saxophone. I've got weird flexible fingers that like bend backwards and super nimble. I've got these giant lungs. I've got big lips. So I'm like, okay, well, I've physically set up to play saxophone. There's something, and I noticed that with other people. I know, one of my friends is a super talented bassist, and he's got some of the biggest gangly hands I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Jimi Hendrix, supposedly his thumb digit could cover the first four strings.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Yeah.
So it's like, fuck, man, there are these people, I'm looking at there's a picture of Hendrix opposite me right now, and I'm just like, I often think of him as an alien. I'm like, man, you came. A lot of these people in that era, like the funk guys, the Parliament Funkadelic guys, I'm like, man, these guys are from other dimensions to just come and teach the human race about music, and we've picked it all up, and we're like, okay, brilliant,
Yeah.
And maybe, if you take theories about like THC and mushroom spores coming from outer space, who knows, maybe like alien life came and seeded some jams on Earth,
Yeah.
Because,
No, that's such a fascinating idea. I love to get into sci-fi speculation like that. So before I was into psychedelics, I was really into this idea of like aliens. And, there's a lot of footage left over from the new age era of like the 80s and 90s of these guys that are supposedly channeling alien beings.
Yeah.
You might have heard of like Bashar. Yeah, so there's that guy, and then there's another guy named Alex Collier. And he purports to be in touch with the civilization from the Andromeda galaxy.
Mm-hmm.
And I have like a skeptical somewhat view of that. I'm open to maybe that, something being there, but more skeptical. But back then, before I had like kind of become more skeptical, one of the things that blew my mind that he said was like, well, first of all the aliens supposedly had these like spiritual messages of love and unity and things that messages you would receive like in a psychedelic or something. But one of the things that he said was that the Andromedans, the thing that they're amazed by us is that we can pull music from thin air. They don't know how we do that. And I just thought that was so cool. Like, could you imagine like a sophisticated alien race that knows so much more, and they're spiritually advanced, technologically more advanced than us, but then they see us creating music from thin air and they're like, that's magical.
Wow.
Just a little aside, but I think that's just such a fun idea.
It's really powerful. Yeah, it is that, like, when I would just, I'll just get something in my head, and I'm like, it's not a song, it's just something that like a tune that I've created, and I'm like, what is that? Who's doing that? Where's that coming from? It is just this weird bit of magic that wants to happen. It's like the human is almost predetermined to want to be musical. There's something about us through communication that music is this really direct energy that it bypasses a lot of the parts of our brain. And yeah, I mean, that's a really fascinating story.
Mm-hmm.
It's total magic. Yeah.
I agree. So yeah, man, I love all of this stuff. I did want to get into something else though. So do you do comedy?
I don't do comedy.
Oh, okay.
I've often thought about doing comedy. Yeah, it's not something I've necessarily toyed with seriously. Often find myself, like, if I'm hanging out with certain people and I'm riffing,
Yeah.
then yeah, it's I'll get into kind of humorous situations. But no, I haven't ever done comedy myself.
Gotcha.
I would like to give it a try at some point.
Yeah. Do you ever experience like absurdity on psychedelics?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's what, for me, that's what particularly mushrooms.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's something about them which is inherently funny.
Yeah.
You start laughing in the similar way of like breaking you out of the ordinary confines, having this ecstatic experience. I think that reframing of situations, taking us out of the usual confines of language, linguistic understandings, it's just really powerful and it's funny. I think, the ideas of the cosmic joke, of being able to engage in this joyful experience, it is just funny. It's like the whole absurdity of being a human in this state, in this body. It's just bizarre that anything, it's funny that anything exists at all.
Right.
And I think
Yeah.
psychedelics can really throw us into that state of being like, something like an infinite universe. It's crazy to even conceptualize, but actually in the state of psychedelics, you can laugh at the fact that your tiny human brain can't understand this infinite universe. And isn't it beautiful? Isn't it wonderful? Isn't it totally ridiculous that the human has been placed in this predicament that it can't understand? It can't understand our own brains. We can't understand the universe. And we're here and we've got no choice about it. That can either send you crazy or it's just really funny.
Right. Yeah, and I think it has to do with that kind of deconditioning that can happen where you take away the normal filters of the way you perceive the world. And that's what allows you to actually see, like, oh, this is actually kind of absurd, whenever you take away the normalcy and just look at it from this other angle, especially when you're in this like kind of stoned and silly state of mind. Do you have any experiences that you can recall of like something really funny or absurd?
Yeah, I mean, the one that I get about the infinite universe, I was on a high dose of mushrooms, like 4 dry grams, and I was really stuck on this idea of infinity and the universe being everything and everywhere. And it was like stuck philosophically, got stuck into a bit of a thought loop. And then I had an image of my friend in my mind's eye, but he was like a little water rat, and it just like popped out of the water and he was laughing. He's got a big beard, so he kind of like assumed this animal form, and he was laughing and he was like, yeah man, don't worry about it. It's infinite, it's beautiful. And I just, because I had that, it was like a spirit animal reveal itself, and it was very cute, and it just started making me laugh that I was aware of being tapped into nature, the universe, understanding that like, these human conceptions of beginning and end and finite, it's just, and something like that is really humbling, and it allows for relaxation, to not feel like you always have to be in this human-centered way of controlling things. And for me, that's the beautiful, funny experiences. Again, it's just like, when you like practices like laughing yoga, it is actually that engagement with the idea that you don't need to be in control, and then it can be really healing and transformative because we have this emerging experience of just like tapping into that joy and that bliss which connects us to, for me, it is that like heartbeat of the universe, just that joy and
that's beautiful.
Silliness,
That's beautiful. I also think there's an element of of unpredictability, or when things are unexpected, sometimes the only thing you can do is laugh.
Yes.
And I remember hearing somewhere, I don't remember the quote or anything, but it was something like, laughing is making room for information that you weren't expecting, essentially. Like, sometimes if something happens, sometimes even something tragic might happen, and you might just feel like, ugh, you want to laugh about it because it's like, or when the punchline of a joke lands, it's funny because you didn't expect it. And it's like it hits you, and that's the thing that triggers the laughter. So I think there's an element of that as well as the joy. And I had an experience that I wanted to tell you about where I experienced the absurdity of mushrooms. So this was also on a pretty high dose. It was 3 grams of penis envy mushrooms, which are
Wow.
super strong.
Yeah, yeah.
And I also lemon tech them, also
Right.
on an empty stomach.
Yeah.
So I was off to the races, and I had a few really funny visions, man. Where one of them was I had my eyes closed and I saw like a little beetle walking on a leaf, and then he stuck his ass up in the air, and then it zoomed into the ass and it went like cosmic into the universe. So it's like I saw the cosmos like zooming into this beetle's.
That's like the story of baby Krishna opening up his mouth and his mother seeing the entire universe in the mouth of Krishna.
Whoa, okay, they're definitely psychedelically informed
Yeah,
religion. Wow.
For sure.
So there was one more thing that happened on this same trip where, are you familiar with the American conservative talk host Tucker Carlson?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So he does this thing where when he's reacting to something that's like morally reprehensible to him, like the M isn't sexy or whatever anymore, he'll like scrunch his brow like this.
Yeah.
You know, he'll make like a confused caveman face.
Yeah.
And I think he's trying to like, it's this like wannabe manly thing that he's doing. So
Yeah.
I
Right.
was closing my eyes and I saw a vision of Tucker Carlson, and he was scrunching his brow like this, and he scrunched it so much that it like imploded into a third eye, and then it just went poof. And I was like, this is amazing, you know? This is so absurd. I wasn't thinking of it. It was just like I witnessed it, and I'm like,
Yeah.
why am I seeing such absurd and silly visions? But I think that absurdity and humor like plays a big role, and it's another one of these subtopics of psychedelics that I think are really important. Psychedelics in music, super important. We just easily spend an hour talking about that, and that's just one little subcategory.
Yeah. I mean, so I wrote my master's thesis on Bill Hicks and humor and psychedelics as practice of resistance, and I think it can be this useful thing to simultaneously resist getting too far gone and too sucked away, because I like to think it's important to have one hand up in the air with the like Shiva, one hand pointing towards the ground. So it's like, okay, you can be in that, the dancing Shiva. It's that idea of, okay, you can be elevated, but you're also grounded. And in the humor, it does allow for this ability to break out of ordinary confines whilst also softening quite difficult stuff and allowing you to be comfortable within social structures. There's a really interesting story about the band Hawkwind from a summer solstice at Stonehenge, where there was an actor from a TV show, a famous TV show called Coronation Street, and the actor's name was Ken Barlow, and he coincidentally happened to be one of the head druids in around Stonehenge. So, we have these modern day druids in the UK, and this actor was, a member of it. And he, at the Stone Circle gathering, Hawkwind, who were probably on quite a bit of acid at the time, just started this chant going, Ken Barlow, Ken Barlow, Ken Barlow. And, people started laughing. But actually, it's like, they are taking the piss.
Yeah.
But they're also simultaneously grounding people and making people feel comfortable and realize that we can engage in the spiritual psychedelic side of things whilst still being able to have a laugh.
Mm-hmm.
It's the weird thing about organized religion is it's all very controlled and ordained, and you can't have a laugh. It's all serious,
Yeah.
And with psychedelics, they are joyful, they're silly. I mean, man, the way things are going with the industry in the UK, it's crazy. It's becoming so boring and lame, and because everything's still not accessible because of the stupid laws, it means that the people filling the void for access are generally people who aren't heads, you know. So then I will often find myself at events where I'm cracking a few jokes and people are looking at me a bit strangely. And then I think, this is a psychedelic event though, right? Why is everyone really square? It's really fascinating to watch how the amount of times I've said something and people just think I'm being serious. I'm like, oh, fuck, that didn't land. That was the wrong audience, you know? And then there's this sort of self-censor and be like, no, don't talk about aliens when, you know, I like went to a psilocybin access rights evening, swanky London bar, and they invited Paul Stamets and then I was talking to someone and I was like, oh, it's all well and good having access to psilocybin, but if you don't have bassistin as well, then you can't chat to the aliens. And they were just like, what are you doing? What are you talking about? I was like, I was like, well, you know, different strains of mushrooms will give you vastly different experiences. So why are you talking about psilocybin? And like last night I went to a relatively stuffy industry event and I did a little bit of heckling from the back where, you know, I was being quite jovial with it, where I was just saying, you know, we need to repeal these stupid laws in the UK that don't serve anyone. And then you could see people getting a bit uncomfortable and you just realize that that kind of silly playfulness can get a bit lost when you're so disconnected from a societal perspective. So for me, it's really important to engage with the community stuff, engage with conversations like this, where it keeps it alive. You know, as much as I don't want to kind of come across as a naysayer, I think, where things are problematic in the psychedelic space, humor can be really useful at picking these things apart. You know, people like Dennis, Tricycle Day, you know, the satire, social media pages, but even just, you know, in the mind and with other people, with your friends, if you're having a conversation, there's ways to talk about things and present information in a way which is funny, because not only are you softening it, but it's like you're simultaneously softening it. You're like, it's a joke, but also it's simultaneously really revealing. And more so than if you were to engage in a laborious takedown of maps, you know, that like, I mean, I get on quite well with the Symposia guys, but it's not particularly, it's never funny. It's always got to be serious. And don't get me wrong, I've been having conversations with my friend today talking about restorative justice within the psychedelic space, where certain characters have done things which are totally negligible of their position, you know, really awful stuff. But it's about like, can we simultaneously be aware of what might need to happen in terms of the conversations and the discussions, and can we do it in a creative way? And I think that's the thing with humor. Really what it comes down to is a creative way of disseminating information, you know.
Absolutely.
That allows us to reframe in a powerful, visceral, biological way, where we're laughing and then we go, fuck, why is that funny? It's really funny because it's just revealed these things that I've never thought about. And in the same way that a psychedelic trip, or it's like I have this thing where it's like, oh, humor's quite psychedelic and psychedelics are quite funny. And it's like these experiences which do break you out, similar with music in this sense of breaking out of those ordinary confines. And I think, you know, for me, certainly, I am going to keep the flame alive of just being a bit mischievous and silly. And, you know, me and my partner doesn't do any psychedelics. She's totally sober, but she's just great to be like, if I'm, you know, stoned, or I haven't really been around her while I've been tripping, but like, especially if I've had like, I don't know, one too many edibles or something, she's just good fun to be around. She'll get involved with the silliness. It's just people that are up for having a silly time because it brings them joy and it connects them to that inner child stuff, which the psychedelics do as well.
That's another key phrase that you just brought up. Yeah, the inner child, which is a huge part of the psychedelic experience. And yeah, you brought up so many good points, man. And I think that it's important that you continue that, act of resistance, like you said in your thesis with Bill Hicks. And that's the same reason that, oftentimes comedians are our best kind of societal reflectors of like being able to monitor what's going on. By the way, I'm from Houston, which is where Bill Hicks is from.
Amazing.
Yeah. So
That's
H-Town
cool.
legend.
Do you still live in Houston now?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool,
Not a very psychedelic place, I have to say. But
how far is it from Austin?
it's about 2.5 hours. So
Okay.
yeah, in car. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you get out there much?
Yeah, for sure, because it's considered the live music capital of the world.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so I've been there a lot for music, and I actually haven't been to Austin as much recently since it's kind of exploded. Because, when I first got like going to Austin, it was essentially a little college town because UT,
Sure.
University of Texas in Austin, is there. So that's really what it was. It was the capital, but it was more of a college town than anything else. And then in the recent like 5 years or whatever, it's just become the new like LA or whatever.
Yeah,
So,
well, it's the comedy. It's, Joe Rogan kind of messed it up with his comedy mothership, which I'm a super US comedy geek. I think the UK comedy is trash because we have these stupid panel like game show comedy panel show things which just ruined comedy in the UK.
Really?
Where everyone's trying too hard to be edgy. And US comedy, I find the Rogan sphere a bit difficult to contend with, but there are some gems within this space connected to the sort of wider US comedy podcasting circuit. So I mean, there's so many comedians that I would love to see that by the time they get big enough to come over to the UK, it's kind of, they're playing at a massive theatre, and it's like someone like Shane Gillis is now big enough to be playing the O2 Arena, which is like a 50,000 seater stadium, where like Louis CK has played. So when it gets to that level, I'm like, okay, that reduces the experience, whereas there's a lot of comedians I like who are brilliant with doing crowd work. I'm like, to have that experience, to go to a club of like whatever 150 people and just be in that space with people who I think are absolute killers, but no one knows them in the UK apart from the people I know who are similar US comedy geeks. So I have this dream to just like have a holiday out in the US for music and comedy.
Yeah, you should, man. You should.
Yeah,
come hang out.
Absolutely.
Come visit.
Yeah, I'll hit you up, man, for sure.
Yeah. So I do my research before a podcast, with what I can. I kind of like dig into people's socials and just see what I can, just spark kind of bullet point things I can ask. And so the one that I haven't gotten to yet is the work you do as the fungi consultant. And I wanted to, this may be a little too much to get into for just 10 minutes, but yeah, if you could talk about what that is and how you got into it, and what is it about the world of mushrooms that inspires such hardcore, because it's like mushroom fans are, you think of the Paul Stamets, someone like you, it's like, it's a whole like cinematic universe that you get into.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the thing that got me into it was the magic mushrooms themselves and collaborating with certain people in the psychedelic space who have been really keen to share this message of, I don't know what you'd call it, like mushroom takeover, mushroom colonization, mushrooms coming to fix and sort out the planet. So working with Darren LeBaron, who's an expert cultivator in the UK, to put on events. And we've known each other for best part of 15 years. And he's been really inspirational in terms of cultivating mushrooms, but just thinking about mushrooms. then a really notable figure, Kalindi E, who sadly passed away during COVID, and he was a proponent of the mega high dose 20-gram experiences. And for me, that was, some of my early introduction into mushrooms was talking to people who were like, yeah, no, it's not about taking a couple of grams and going to the woods with your friend. I mean, literally, this from a talk that Kalindi gave in London, he said, it's not about taking a couple of grams with your friends, going to the woods and having a good time. It's about taking 20 dried grams on your own in the dark and holding onto the floor. I was like, okay, man. So conception of mushrooms as an intelligence, as a technology, as this entry point into these interdimensional worlds for hyperspace travel, it allowed a relationship with mushrooms to form where I saw them as allies and companions, and really something to engage with in a very human sense, a very pragmatic way of talking to these things, of asking, of reflecting back, and being open to having things being revealed and feeling that safety, that connection to the earth, the mycelial web. And then in recent years, I've been using a lot of functional mushrooms myself to manage symptoms of fibromyalgia, things like pain, sleep, fatigue. Energy has been really difficult. And I, probably about 5 years ago, was just turned on to functional mushrooms. And because of my condition and having to chuck all different types of supplements at myself, I really found that functional mushrooms were overwhelmingly things that worked quite well and that I could identify often in a relatively immediate sense. Like, yeah, I've taken that thing an hour ago. I've taken some cordyceps, for example, an hour ago, and now I'm feeling, yeah, let's go. I can do the day. And because I've taken so many mushroom supplements, I've taken a lot of crap products. I've used some really high quality products, and there's a lot of confusion about the terminology surrounding mushroom extracts and why people should be taking mushrooms. People hear about lion's mane, for example, or they've heard about psilocybin for depression, and then that turns them on to thinking about, oh, there's all these other mushrooms. Oh, maybe I should take reishi. Mm-hmm. And people say to me, oh, should I take this one? I'm like, do you know why you've thought about taking that? And often people won't know why. Often it's just because it's in the news. And there's also a lot of CBD companies in the UK moving over to functional mushrooms because the CBD market has just totally tanked. So there is some diversification going on. And I felt the need to do a lot of detective work and see what is actually going on, because I've, as I said, had the benefit of trying lots of different mushroom products, and there are superior ones out there, but because we live in a free market world, it means that a company can just put out whatever products, or they think they are doing something right, or good, or they're putting some information on the front of a product and then there's different information on the back, and they're just wanting to get the product out. So I would hope that a lot of these companies are well intentioned, but there's a lot of willful ignorance and I think intentional misleading of customers just to sell products. So from my perspective, I think it's about being an advocate for the mushrooms and finding where I can help shift industry. Because for me it was like, well, I could just ignore the fact that things are going in a bit of a weird direction with mushrooms, or I can try and get involved and try and be that slightly annoying niggling voice that says things like, to people that are studying directly under David Nutter, Imperial College, why aren't you studying these different alkaloids within mushrooms? You need to be having people that can ask these difficult questions and point out where there are shortfalls and gaps in knowledge. And yeah, it's just it's as I said about advocating for the mushrooms so that people can get the best experience with functional mushrooms and psilocybin as well. If we reach that point where I'm able to talk about it more freely in the UK, and yeah, culture
Cool.
changes a bit. So yeah,
So your website is the Fungi Consultant. So that's the service you offer is consulting to do the things that you're saying here, right?
yes, exactly. Yeah, so personalized consultations, whether for individuals or organizations, on understanding this whole mess of extracts and powders and tinctures and all these different ways in which you can take mushrooms, and getting into understanding how we're testing for these compounds, what these compounds can do, where there might be really overstated claims.
Mm-hmm.
And it's all really new. It's all really emerging. It's certainly more advanced in the US than it is in the UK.
I see. Yeah, I'm kind of familiar with that world. I worked at kind of like a healthy restaurant, and they served mushroom teas. So
Nice.
I was drinking reishi tea. I would just like pull out the pitcher, and I was the one brewing it a lot of the time
Right,
too.
yeah,
So I would just like, I'm gonna take some of this. You know, maybe I'll live to 100 if I drink this
yeah. Yeah,
reishi
yeah.
right now.
You will, man. Mushroom of immortality.
Yeah, yeah, and then there was chaga tea. I also had
Yeah.
that, and then I experimented with the lion's mane and the whole statement stack thing. I haven't
Yeah,
really
yeah.
been keeping up with that just because like when money's tight, mushroom supplements aren't really at the top of my list.
I know the feeling, man.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, it's a tricky one.
yeah. What's your go-to like top two or three of the functional mushrooms?
For me, my top three are lion's mane, reishi, and cordyceps.
Mm.
The cognitive benefit that I find from lion's mane, just that ability to be a bit more on point, a bit more organized. I find organization sometimes a bit difficult. I think I've got a touch of ADHD, so that allows me just to be a bit more calm and centered. Also for meditative practices, that's what lion's mane was originally used for in Japan by Buddhist monks.
That's so
So
cool.
that's really useful. Cordyceps for energy is just a game changer, and reishi for sleep, relaxation, inflammation, also brain function as well. There's a lot of promising stuff with reishi. So I know there's a lot of other ones that gain popularity, but for me, those are the
Yeah.
ones that there's like you can immediately, if you've got good quality products, I think there's relatively understanding of how is this thing benefiting you or not.
Yeah.
Then you need to wait very long. How about you? What are the ones that you?
I've definitely noticed that with lion's mane. I could definitely feel it. I think you're supposed to take it for a while, and then the effect kind of stacks up. And then, yeah, I drank reishi and chaga, and I felt pretty good. But yeah, lion's mane is definitely the one that I noticed. And I took it in addition with this stuff called bacopa, which is not a mushroom, but it's similarly like a nootropic that I felt like it was helping me. And that can be the issue with nootropics, is that like you don't know, is this working or not? But yeah, with some of them, it's more clear than others that it is doing something. So yeah, I'll throw in the website for
Amazing,
people to
thank
check
you.
out. And I'm also very thankful that cordyceps does not affect us the same way that it does the insects. So we got like mushrooms sprouting out of our skull. That's so metal, by the way.
It's
that is
amazing.
the most metal thing ever.
Yeah. Do you know this Instagram called Nature is Metal?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't always have the stomach to watch it, but like sometimes
same as well.
I do.
But
Yeah. Yeah, the point still stands. Well,
Yeah.
all right, man. Well, I'll let you get
Amazing.
going.
God,
Yeah,
this has been awesome. Thank you so much.
I feel the same way. I'm super happy to hear that, and we'll absolutely stay in touch and
Definitely.
connect more in the future, brother.
Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully, one day connect in person. It'd be really good.
Yeah. No, it'll happen. Just
Yes.
whenever the time comes. But I have a good
Absolutely.
feeling it'll happen.
Yes.
All right, Ollie.
Awesome. All right, mate. Take care, Tyler.
All right, you too, man.